A deaf millionaire dined alone until the poor maid's baby appeared and changed everything. The little girl entered his life without asking permission, with scribbles and silent hugs. What seemed like a harmless encounter became a reason for family scandal. But in that chaos, he heard for the first time the sound of a real home. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. And now, back to our story. A light rain was falling over New York City when Marina Hayes walked through the doors of Mount Sinai Hospital for the 10th time that month. It was early March, and the city seemed to be conspiring against her with its heavy, grey weather that made everything feel even more suffocating. She clutched her purse to her body, as if protecting herself from something invisible. Her high heels echoing down the white, sterile hallways of the 8th floor. Each step was a conscious effort not to collapse right there, in the middle of a corridor she already knew by heart. It had been almost 3 months since she got the call. She was in Paris, closing a major deal for her graphic design firm, when the phone rang in the middle of the night. It was Robert, her uncle. His voice was strangely controlled, almost rehearsed, when he said that Edward Hayes, her father, had suffered a massive stroke and was in critical condition. She remembered standing frozen in her hotel room, looking out at the distant lights of the Eiffel Tower, the news hitting her like a punch that didn't exactly hurt, but sucked all the air from her lungs. She took the first flight back, not out of love, but out of obligation, out of protocol, because that's what was expected of her. The only daughter of Edward Hayes, one of the most influential real estate developers in New York, couldn't just ignore the situation. But as the plane crossed the Atlantic, Marina felt only a strange emptiness. It wasn't sadness, it wasn't fear. It was something more like resignation. As if this moment was inevitable, foretold, part of a script she had known since childhood. Room 804 was too quiet to hold a life. The machines beeped in a steady rhythm. The monitors displayed numbers Marina had already learned to decipher, and at the center of it all was him. Edward Hayes, 62 years old, his grey hair perfectly combed even while unconscious, his beard shaved every day by the nursing staff, his body motionless under impeccable white sheets. He seemed smaller than Marina remembered, more fragile, almost human. She approached slowly, as she always did, and sat in the chair beside the bed. She didn't touch him. She never touched him. She just watched, trying to recognize something in that face that resembled affection, memory, any recollection not tinged with absence. Edward Hayes had never been a present father. Marina grew up surrounded by luxury, attended the best schools, had everything money could buy, except the one thing she truly wanted: his presence. He was always traveling, always in meetings, always busy building his empire while she built her own childhood, alone. Her memories of him were fragmented like scattered scenes from a movie she'd seen long ago. 7th birthday party he didn't show up for. A high school graduation where he arrived late and left before it was over. A violent argument when she was 18, when Marina said she was going to study design instead of architecture, and he called her irresponsible, a dreamer, someone who wasted opportunities. It was the last real conversation they had. After that, Marina moved into her own apartment, built her career far from the shadow of the Hayes name, and maintained only the cold formal contact expected of people who share blood ties, but not soul ties. And now here, he was trapped between life and its absence, sustained by tubes and technology, while the world around him kept spinning as if nothing had changed. Marina sighed and picked up her phone. She had 17 unread messages, most from the law firm that handled the family's business. There were also 3 missed calls from Robert, Edward's younger brother, who had temporarily taken over as CEO of Hayes Construction. He wanted constant meetings, signatures, decisions. He wanted Marina to get more involved, to take a side, to choose a team. But she didn't want any team. She just wanted this to be over one way or another, so she could go back to her life in Paris and forget she ever had a father named Edward. That's when she heard the sound. A low meow, almost inaudible, coming from somewhere near the room's door. Marina looked up, frowning. It meowed again, this time more insistent. She stood up slowly and walked to the door, opening it carefully. The hallway was empty, but when she looked down, she met a pair of enormous yellow eyes staring right at her. It was a cat. Small, thin, with mottled fur in shades of grey, white and brown, its ears slightly back, its body tense as if ready to bolt at any moment. It stared at her for a few seconds, and then, to Marina's surprise, walked into the room as if it knew the way. She stood paralyzed for a moment, unsure how to react. Animals weren't allowed on this floor, much less roaming the halls. She was about to call someone, but something made her hesitate. The cat walked straight to Edward's bed, gave a small leap, and settled down beside the developer's inert body, resting its head on his hand, which lay on the sheet. And then it started to purr. The sound filled the entire room, deep and constant, like a small, persistent engine. Marina stood still, watching the scene with a mixture of disbelief and something she couldn't name. The cat closed its eyes, snuggled in closer, and continued to purr. And it was in that moment that Marina saw it. A tear. It slid slowly from the corner of Edward's left eye, down his temple, and disappeared into the pillow. Marina took a step forward, her heart racing. She glanced at the monitors, but nothing had changed. His pressure was stable, his heartbeat regular, the assisted breathing functioning normally. And yet, there was a tear. She buzzed the nurse's station. It only took a few seconds for the door to open, and for Sharon, a middle-aged woman who cared for Edward during the afternoon shift, to walk in. Sharon stopped short as soon as she saw the cat, her eyes wide. "He's back," was all she said. Marina blinked, confused. "What do you mean, back?" Sharon approached slowly, as if afraid of scaring the animal, and explained in a low voice. It wasn't the first time the cat had shown up 3 days ago in the middle of the night. No one knew how it got in, how it got up to the 8th floor, how it found this exact room, but it had. And since then, it came back every day, always at the same time, always with the same ritual. It would come in, get on the bed, lean against Edward and purr, and every time it did, something happened. Small reactions, a twitch of a finger, a facial contraction. Once he had opened his eyes for a few seconds before closing them again. "The doctors said, they're involuntary reflexes," Sharon continued. "But I think it's more than that. I think this little guy knows something we don't." Marina looked at the cat, still nestled beside her father, its eyes closed, its purr continuous. There was something deeply strange about the scene, but also something incredibly tender. She had never seen Edward like this, vulnerable, touched by something that wasn't business, power, or control. It was just a stray cat, thin and scruffy, offering the only kind of comfort it knew. Marina sat back down in the chair, unable to take her eyes off the scene. She stayed there for almost an hour, watching. The cat didn't move. Edward didn't react again. But there was something in the air, a subtle shift, as if that once cold and impersonal room had, for the first time, gained a little bit of life. When Marina finally left, it was almost dark. She walked past the reception desk and went straight to the parking garage, but before getting into her car, she stopped and looked back. The hospital glowed in the darkness, all those illuminated windows, each one hiding a different story of pain, hope, or farewell. She thought about the cat, that small animal that had chosen her father out of so many other people in that enormous building, and for the first time in a long time, Marina felt something that wasn't anger or indifference. She felt curiosity. In the following days, Marina returned to the hospital with a regularity that surprised even herself. Always at the same time, always with the same silent expectation. And the cat was there, punctual as a clock, climbing onto the bed, purring, touching Edward with that strange gentleness. And the reactions continued. Small movements, occasional tears. Once, Edward moved his head, slightly as if searching for something. Marina started asking questions. She asked the nurses, the doctors, the security guards. No one knew where the cat came from. No one could catch it when it left, because it would simply disappear down the hallways and stairwells, too fast to be followed. It was like a ghost, appearing and vanishing without a trace. That's when Marina had an idea. She took out her phone and snapped a picture of the cat. She didn't know exactly why she was doing it, but something inside her said it was important. She posted the photo on social media with a simple caption. "Does anyone know this cat? He shows up every day at Mount Sinai Hospital." The responses started pouring in within hours. Most were from curious people, others offered to help capture the animal, some made jokes. But in the midst of all those messages, one stood out. It was from a woman named Brenda, who simply said, "I know that cat, and I also know the man who used to take care of him." Marina felt her heart race. She replied immediately, asking for more information. Brenda explained that she lived in Queens, near Astoria, and that for years she had seen a well-dressed man feeding that cat on the neighborhood streets, always in the late afternoon, always with the same patients, always alone. She thought it was strange because the man clearly wasn't from around there. He drove an expensive car, wore elegant suits, but still he would stop, crouch down on the dirty sidewalk, and put out food for the little creature. One day, out of curiosity, Brenda had discreetly followed the man and saw him go into a nearby public school, where he stayed for almost an hour talking with children and teachers. Afterward, he went to a small nursing home and spent the afternoon there, playing guitar for the residents. She had never seen anything like it. A clearly wealthy, powerful man, dedicating his free time to forgotten corners of the city, always accompanied by that mottled cat. Marina read the message 3 times, trying to process what she was hearing. It didn't make sense. Edward Hayes wasn't that kind of person. He didn't have time for charity, no patience for animals, no interest in anything that didn't generate profit or power. But as she reread Brenda's words, Marina realized something. She didn't know her father. She never really had. She only had an image built over the years, shaped by absences and silences, but not by facts. She arranged to meet Brenda the next day. She needed to understand. She needed to know who Edward Hayes really was, because if there was one thing Marina was sure of now, it was that the man lying in that hospital bed was hiding much more than she had ever imagined. As she drove home that night, Marina thought about the cat. She thought about how it had found Edward among thousands of people. She thought about how it came back every day, faithful and persistent, offering something no one else could give. And for the first time since she'd returned from Paris, Marina felt something different in her chest. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. It was the first crack of light in a story she had always believed was set in stone. When she got home, Marina couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of the day. The cat, Edward's tears, Brenda's message. It all felt like a piece of a giant puzzle she never knew existed. And now, for the first time, she wanted to put that puzzle together. She wanted to understand. She wanted, perhaps, to finally meet the man who raised her, even if it was too late. Her phone vibrated on the nightstand. It was a message from Robert. He wanted an urgent meeting at the company office. There were decisions to be made, papers to be signed, legal matters that couldn't wait. Marina sighed. She knew what that meant. Robert was consolidating his power, preparing the ground to permanently take command of Hayes. Construction. And for that he needed her signature, her agreement, her silence. But Marina was no longer in the mood to be silent. Something had changed in that hospital room. Something small, fragile, but real. And she wasn't going to let Robert or anyone else erase it before she could understand what it truly meant. She replied to the message with a single word: tomorrow. Then she turned off her phone, rolled over, and finally managed to close her eyes. For the first time in months, Marina slept without dreaming of Paris, without dreaming of contracts or designs or trips. She dreamed of a mottled cat with immense yellow eyes, walking alone through the grey streets of New York, searching for someone only he knew. And in some strange way, that dream brought her peace. When the sun rose the next morning, Marina woke up with a different feeling. It wasn't exactly hope, but it was close. It was the feeling that maybe the story she thought she knew was only just beginning to be told, and that, in the end, there might be more than just absence and silence. Maybe there was also a chance for a new beginning. The coffee grew cold on the table as Marina reread the emails that had arrived overnight. They were all from Robert, each more urgent than the last, all using words like unavoidable, critical, strategic. He wanted to see her at the Hayes construction office at 9 in the morning, accompanied by her personal lawyer, to discuss what he called the future of the company. Marina knew exactly what that meant. Robert was preparing to formalize his position, to turn what was temporary into permanent, and he needed her approval to legitimize the process. She picked up her phone and typed, "A quick message. I'll be there at 10. I have an appointment first." Robert's reply came almost immediately. "This can't wait, Marina." She sighed, but didn't respond. She had learned from her own father that silence was sometimes worth more than 1,000 words. She put her phone in her purse, took the last sip of cold coffee and left the apartment. She had someone to meet before facing Robert and his corporate games. Brenda had suggested a diner on Ditmars Boulevard in Astoria. It took Marina almost 40 minutes to get there, battling the chaotic traffic on the BQE on a Monday morning. When she finally parked and entered the establishment, she found a woman in her 50s sitting at a corner table, distractedly stirring a cup of coffee. She looked up as Marina approached, and something in her face showed immediate recognition. "You have his eyes," was the first thing Brenda said, pointing to the empty chair across from her. Marina sat, not quite sure how to respond. She ordered a coffee and sat in silence for a few seconds, observing the woman before her. Brenda had a face weathered by time and work, calloused hands, her hair pulled back in a simple bun. She wore clean but worn clothes, and there was a quiet dignity in the way she sat, looked, and existed. "Thank you for coming," Marina said finally. Brenda gave a small smile. "I had to. When I saw that picture of Patches, the little cat, I knew it was time to tell you some things." "Patches?" "That's what I always called him. I never knew if he had another name, but he answered to that. Your father called him that too sometimes. Patches." Marina felt a strange tightness in her chest. There was something deeply intimate in knowing her father had a pet name for that animal, that he would crouch on the sidewalk, that he would call to it, that he would form that kind of bond. It didn't fit the image she had of him at all. Brenda continued, looking out the window as if seeing something far away. "I worked at your family's house many years ago. You were little, maybe 6 or 7. I cleaned the house, cooked, organized everything. It was a good time in my life. Your father was demanding, but fair, paid well, treated us with respect, which was rare back then, but then something happened." Marina leaned forward, listening intently. "What happened?" Brenda took a deep breath. "Your mother's gold bracelet went missing. It was an expensive piece, with diamonds, a family heirloom. Your grandmother accused me and the other housekeeper, Nancy. She said it had to be one of us because no one else had access to that room. Your father didn't say anything at the time, just watched. The next day, Nancy and I were let go. No explanation, no chance to defend ourselves, nothing. Just an envelope with our pay and a note not to come back." Marina felt a wave of shame. She vaguely remembered that time, remembered her paternal grandmother living with them for a few months, but she didn't recall this specific incident. "I was devastated," Brenda continued. "It wasn't even about the bracelet. I knew I hadn't taken it. But it was the humiliation, you know, to have worked honestly and leave like a thief. I tried to find work elsewhere, but the word got around. No one wanted to hire someone who'd been fired for theft. I spent almost a year unemployed, living off odd jobs, supporting my 2 kids alone because their father had left a long time ago. And then one night I was walking home because I didn't even have money for the subway, and I saw him. Your father. He was standing in front of a little bar right here in Astoria, far from where he lived. He saw me too. I wanted to look away, to pretend I didn't recognize him, but he came over to me, asked how I was doing, asked if I needed anything." Marina held her breath. "And what did you say?" "I said I was fine. I had too much pride to admit I was starving, that my kids were wearing patched-up clothes, that I was 3 months behind on rent. But he saw it. I don't know how, but he saw it. He took out his wallet and gave me money. A lot of money. He said it was a fair severance, that he should have done it sooner. I didn't want to take it, but he insisted. He said I deserved a second chance, and that if I wanted, he could recommend me to some people who needed someone trustworthy. Brenda paused for a moment, her eyes welling up. Marina waited in silence, feeling something strange growing inside her. It wasn't exactly relief, but it was close. It was the feeling that, maybe, the man she thought she knew was only part of the story. I got a good job after that, Brenda continued, discreetly wiping away a tear. And a few months later he showed up again. This time he wasn't alone. He had a cat with him, Patches. He said he'd found the little guy injured on the street, had taken him to the vet but couldn't take him home because his mother was allergic. He asked if I knew anyone who could take care of him. And did you? No, I lived in a small apartment. I couldn't have a pet. But he understood. He said he'd just let the cat be a stray, but that he'd keep looking after him. And he did. For years. Every week he'd come to the neighborhood, bring food, take Patches to the vet when needed, play with him. And while he was here, he'd visit the school on the corner, the nursing home 2 blocks away, the community center. He donated money, time, attention, but always quietly, always without fanfare, always like it was a secret. Why? Marina asked, her voice almost a whisper. Why would he do that in secret? Brenda shrugged. I think he was ashamed of being good, or afraid of being judged. Or maybe he thought kindness didn't fit the image he'd built, I don't know. But I know he was different when he was here. Lighter, more human. Like he could take off the mask for a few hours and just be himself. Marina sat in silence, processing it all. She felt like she was meeting a stranger, someone who happened to share her DNA but was completely different from the man who raised her, or rather, the man who didn't raise her. The man who was always absent, always distant, always too busy to be a father. And the bracelet? Marina asked suddenly. Did you ever find out who took it? Brenda smiled, but it was a sad smile. They found out. About 2 years later, your grandmother confessed she'd sold it to pay off gambling debts. She had a problem with betting, something the family kept well hidden. But in the end, the truth came out. Your father found me, apologized, offered me my job back, but I refused. I had already rebuilt my life, and I didn't want to go back to that place, you know. But we kept in touch. He'd visit me sometimes, always with Patches, always asking about my kids, always helping in some way. Marina felt a strange mix of emotions, anger for what her father had done, or rather what he hadn't done to defend her at the time, but also a flicker of something that felt like pride for discovering that he, in his own twisted way, had tried to fix his mistake. Not in the right way, perhaps, not in the way Brenda deserved, but he had tried. They talked for another hour. Brenda told stories Marina had never heard. She spoke of how Edward would spend hours at the school reading to children, how he paid for medical treatments for residents of the nursing home without anyone knowing, how he organized food baskets for needy families every Christmas, all of it anonymous, discreet, hidden. When Marina finally left the diner, it was past 11 in the morning. She had 17 missed calls from Robert and a series of increasingly irritated messages. She ignored them all and drove straight to the hospital. She needed to see her father. She needed to look at him with these new eyes Brenda had given her, needed to try to understand who this man was, who now seemed torn between 2 completely opposite worlds. Room 804 was silent when she entered. Edward remained motionless, the machines beeping in their usual rhythm, everything exactly as it was yesterday, the day before, 3 months ago. But something was different now. Marina looked at him and for the first time didn't just see the absent father. She also saw the man who fed a stray cat, the man who crouched on dirty sidewalks, the man who read to children and held the hands of forgotten seniors. She approached the bed, hesitated for a second, and then did something she hadn't done in years. She touched his hand. It was warm, surprisingly warm for someone so far from consciousness. Marina laced her fingers through his and stood there, trying to convey something she couldn't name. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe it was the beginning of an attempt to understand. That's when she heard the familiar meow. She turned and saw Patches entering the room with that confident walk of someone who knows the way. He jumped onto the bed with his usual agility, settled next to Edward, and began to purr. And then it happened. Edward's hand moved. It wasn't a reflex, not an involuntary spasm. It was intentional. His fingers slowly closed around Marina's hand, squeezing gently, like someone holding onto something precious and afraid to let it drop. Marina held her breath. "Dad," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Edward didn't answer. He didn't open his eyes. But the pressure on her hand continued firm and steady, and then for the second time Marina saw a tear slide down his face. She squeezed his hand back, feeling something break inside her chest. She didn't know if it was pain or relief, anger or love, past or future. Maybe it was all of it together, mixed, confusing, real. They stayed like that for several minutes, Marina holding her father's hand, the cat purring beside them, the machines keeping alive a hope that no one knew was legitimate or just cruel. But in that moment, Marina didn't care about the machines, the numbers, on the monitors, the doctor's opinions. She only cared about that hand holding hers, about that touch that said more than years of conversations ever could. When she left the hospital, the sun was high in the sky. Marina picked up her phone and finally replied to Robert, "Can't make it today, something came up, we'll talk tomorrow." His response came back dripping with poorly disguised irritation. "This is unacceptable, Marina. We're talking about the future of the company, about decisions that can't wait. I need your signature on important documents. If you don't show up, I'll have to take matters into my own hands." Marina looked at the message and felt something different. It wasn't fear, it wasn't insecurity. It was a strange clarity, as if the pieces of a puzzle were finally starting to fit. Robert was in too much of a hurry, too insistent. There was something wrong with all that urgency, something that went beyond simple concern for the company. She typed a short reply. "Do what you think is necessary, but don't count on my signature for now." Then she locked her phone and went home. She needed to think, to process everything she had discovered that day. But for the first time since returning from Paris, Marina felt she had a purpose. She was no longer just the distant daughter fulfilling a protocol. She was someone who was beginning to piece together a story much bigger than she had imagined. A story about a divided man, about guarded secrets, about love expressed in twisted and hidden ways. And at the center of this story was a mottled cat named Patches, who somehow knew more about Edward Hayes than his own daughter. Marina spent the rest of the day researching. She called former family employees, talked to neighbors from the house where she grew up, contacted people who had worked at her father's company over the years. Each conversation revealed a new piece of the puzzle. A secretary told her that Edward secretly paid for scholarships for employees' children. A former driver revealed that he used to ask to stop at shelters and nursing homes during business trips, always bringing donations. A teacher from the school in Astoria confirmed that he showed up once a month to tell stories to the kids, always accompanied by a mottled cat that the children adored. Each revelation was like a punch to the gut. Marina wondered how it was possible to spend her entire life beside that man without truly knowing him. How had she built such a solid and wrong image, so far from reality? But at the same time, a part of her understood. Because Edward didn't make it easy. He hid, he pushed away, he built walls instead of bridges. And Marina, hurt by his absences, had learned to build her own walls. As night fell, Marina found herself looking at an old photo she had found in a box stored in a closet. It was from her 5th birthday party. Edward was in the background, slightly out of focus, but she could see his face. He wasn't smiling, but he was looking at her with an expression Marina had never noticed before. It was tenderness, mixed with something that looked like fear, or maybe sadness, as if he wanted to really be there, but didn't know how, as if love, for him, was a foreign language he had never learned to speak. Marina held the photo to her chest and let the tears fall freely. She cried for the little girl she was who grew up thinking she wasn't loved. She cried for the father she had, who loved but didn't know how to show it. She cried for all the lost years, for all the conversations that never happened, for all the hugs that remained trapped between fear and pride. And as she cried, a certainty grew within her. She wasn't going to let Robert or anyone else erase Edward's story before she had a chance to know it completely. She wasn't going to let business, money, or power be more important than the truth, because in the end that's what mattered. The truth, even if it was imperfect, even if it was painful, even if it came too late. The next morning, Marina woke with a new determination. She showered, dressed carefully, and drove to the Hayes construction office. It was time to face Robert. It was time to find out what he was hiding. Because Marina was sure now that something was being hidden. His urgency, his insistence, the documents that couldn't wait. It all concealed something bigger. And she was going to find out what. The Hayes construction offices took up 3 floors of a commercial building on Park Avenue, in the heart of New York's financial district. Marina hadn't set foot in there for at least 5 years, not since a holiday party she attended purely out of obligation. When the elevator doors opened on the 22nd floor, she was greeted by that characteristic smell of corporate environments: fresh coffee, expensive perfume, and air conditioning that was far too cold. The receptionist, a young woman with sleek hair and a professional smile, recognized her immediately. "Good morning, Ms. Hayes. Mr. Hayes is waiting for you in the main conference room." Marina nodded her thanks and walked down the Italian, marble-lined hallway. The walls displayed framed photographs of projects completed by the company over the decades: luxury condos, shopping malls, office towers, each representing millions of dollars in profit and power. It was impressive, she had to admit. Edward had built it all from scratch, turning a small family construction business into one of the largest groups in the industry. But looking at those photos, Marina didn't feel pride. She only felt a strange sadness, as if every brick in those buildings had been paid for with absences, with silences, with everything that could have been but never was. The door to the conference room was ajar. Marina pushed it open slowly and found Robert sitting at the head of the long mahogany table, surrounded by 3 men in suits. She recognized one of them, Gerald Martin, the lawyer who had handled the family's interests for over 20 years. The other 2 were strangers, probably legal advisors or company executives. Robert looked up and smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Marina, so glad you could finally make it. We were starting to think you weren't coming." Marina closed the door behind her and walked to a chair on the other side of the table, deliberately far from Robert. She sat down calmly, crossed her legs, and waited. She wasn't going to make this easy for him. Robert cleared his throat, as if preparing for a rehearsed speech. "Well, as you know, Edward's situation remains delicate. The doctors see no signs of significant improvement, and every day that passes without clear leadership in the company poses enormous risks. We have contracts waiting to be signed, strategic decisions that can't be postponed, and investors worried about the continuity of management." Marina kept her expression neutral. "I understand. And what solution are you proposing?" It was Gerald who answered, adjusting his glasses. "Ms. Hayes, considering your father's temporary incapacitation, the board of directors believes it would be prudent to formalize Mr. Roberts' appointment as CEO of Hayes Construction. This would bring stability to the market and allow operations to continue normally until your father, perhaps, recovers." Marina noted the pause before "recovers." The lack of conviction in Gerald's voice was clear. They had already decided Edward wasn't coming back. "Temporary, you said?" Gerald hesitated. "Well, formally, yes, but we have to be realistic. Medicine doesn't work miracles, and the more time passes—" "And you need my signature for this?" Marina interrupted. Robert leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "You're the sole direct heir, Marina. Your signature is necessary to legitimize any structural decision in the company. It's just a formality, but an important one." Marina watched her uncle for a few seconds. Robert was 8 years younger than Edward, but looked older. His face was etched with stress, his grey hair disheveled, his eyes red from sleepless nights. Or maybe from guilt. Marina didn't know. But there was something about him that screamed anxiety, an urgency. That went beyond simple corporate concern. I need to see the documents before I sign anything, she said finally. Of course, Robert replied too quickly, pushing a thick folder across the table. It's all here. Formal appointment, executive powers, board restructuring, succession plan. Succession plan? Marina repeated, frowning. My father is still alive. An awkward silence filled the room. It was one of the advisors, a thin man with a pencil moustache, who spoke. It's just a precaution, ma'am. In cases of prolonged incapacitation, it's prudent to have a plan in place. Nothing definitive, just preparation. Marina opened the folder and began to flip through the documents. There were dozens of pages filled with legal jargon, clauses, sub-clauses, signatures, and stamps. She wasn't a lawyer, but she had learned to read contracts over the years, managing her own firm. And something in those papers wasn't right. There were mentions of asset transfers, resource reallocation, and changes to the company's ownership structure that went far beyond a simple temporary CEO appointment. I need to take this to my lawyer for review, Marina said, closing the folder. Robert's face turned red. Marina, that's ridiculous. These are standard documents, drafted by the best corporate law firm in New York. There's nothing wrong here. Then you won't have a problem with me having them reviewed, right? Robert stood up abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. You don't understand the gravity of the situation. Every day without a clear decision means millions in losses. We have a consortium interested in acquiring part of our operations, an excellent proposal that will guarantee the company's financial health for years to come. But that window won't stay open forever. Marina stood up too, clutching the folder to her chest. Then I suggest you pray that window stays open for a few more days, because I'm not signing anything until I'm sure of what I'm signing. She turned to leave, but Gerald's voice stopped her. Ms. Hayes, there's something you need to know. In recent weeks, we've identified some irregularities in the company's finances. Nothing major, but they require urgent attention. Marina turned around slowly. What kind of irregularities? Gerald exchanged a quick glance with Robert before continuing. Unauthorized movements in some accounts, funds transferred without proper documentation. It's possible there was mismanagement or even, well, we don't want to accuse anyone without proof, but there are indications of potential misappropriation of funds. And who do you think it was? Marina asked, already knowing the answer. Robert composed himself, sitting back down. Marina, I know this is hard to hear, but the evidence points to decisions made by Edward himself in the months before the stroke. Strange transfers, large donations to unknown institutions, unjustified payments. We're trying to protect his legacy, you see. If this information leaks, the company's image will be severely damaged. Marina felt her blood boil. Donations to charitable institutions. Robert hesitated. Yes, some were to registered charities, but others, we can't fully trace them. They were made in cash without proper tax documentation. This could constitute money laundering, tax evasion, a whole host of legal problems. Marina wanted to laugh. She wanted to scream. She wanted to take those documents and throw them in the faces of Robert, Gerald, and all those men in suits who had the audacity to call kindness a crime. Because that's what they were doing. They were turning Edward's acts of compassion into irregularities, into problems, into reasons to strip him of everything he had built. But she controlled herself. She took a deep breath, counted to 10 in her head, and then smiled. It was a cold, calculated smile, the same kind she'd seen on her father's face the few times he had to deal with business adversaries. Thank you for the information, she said calmly. I'll look into this personally, and until I have all the answers, I won't be authorizing anything. You can consider this meeting adjourned. She walked out of the room before anyone could protest, holding the folder so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her heart was pounding, her breathing was ragged, but she maintained an erect posture until she was inside the elevator. Only when the doors closed and she was alone in that cramped, mirrored space did Marina let her body relax against the cool metal wall. She closed her eyes, trying to organize her thoughts. It was all making sense now. Robert's urgency, the suspicious documents, the accusations of irregularities. He was trying to take over the company before anyone discovered what Edward was really doing with the money. He was trying to turn kindness into a crime, compassion into a fiscal irregularity. And if Marina hadn't heard Brenda's stories, if she hadn't learned about her father's other side, she might have even believed him. She might have even signed those papers and let Robert do whatever he wanted. But now she knew. And she wasn't going to let Edward's legacy be tarnished by greed and lies. When she got home, Marina tossed her purse on the couch and opened her laptop. She spent the rest of the afternoon researching the institutions mentioned in the documents Robert had given her. They were community schools, homeless shelters, support centers for low-income families, public nursing homes, all located in the outer boroughs of New York, all operating on minimal resources, all doing the quiet, essential work that no one saw, no one applauded, no one recognized. Exactly the kind of places Edward visited in secret. Marina called some of these institutions. She spoke with coordinators, directors, volunteers. Each conversation confirmed what she already suspected. Edward Hayes had been donating to these places for years. Large sums, yes, but always discreetly, never wanting recognition, always asking them not to publicize his name. He paid for renovations, bought equipment, sponsored educational programs, and he did it all without proper documentation because he didn't want to turn kindness into marketing, into a tax deduction, into a public relations tool. Was it irregular? Technically, yes. Was it problematic from an accounting standpoint? Probably, but was it wrong? Not at all. It was just Edward being Edward, doing good in his own twisted, hidden, imperfect way. But doing it. Marina leaned back in her chair, exhaustion finally setting in. She picked up her phone and wrote a message to Brenda. "I need your help. Would you be willing to give a statement about everything you know about my father's activities?" The reply came quickly. "Of course, when do you need me?" Marina looked at the clock. It was almost 7 in the evening. "Tomorrow morning at the hospital, I want you to meet my father, even if he can't meet you back yet." After sending the message, Marina made some tea and stood by the window, looking at the city lighting up below. New York at night was chaotic, noisy, intense. Millions of lives happening simultaneously, each with its own battles, its own secrets, its own twisted ways of loving. And out there, somewhere in the city, was Patches, the little cat who knew more about Edward than his own family, the cat that, in some inexplicable way, had become the key to unlocking all the secrets. Marina thought about how strange it would be to explain all this to an outsider. How do you explain that a stray cat was saving not just a man in a coma, but the entire truth about who he really was? How do you explain that sometimes love manifests in the most unlikely ways, in the most unexpected places, through the most unusual creatures? There was no way to explain it, but she didn't have to. Because some things don't fit into words, don't fit into logic, don't fit into rational explanations. Some things just are, and you can choose to ignore them or choose to accept them. Marina had made her choice. The next morning, Marina and Brenda met at the hospital entrance. Brenda was visibly nervous, shifting her purse from one hand to the other, her gaze lost among the people coming and going. "Thanks for coming," Marina said, lightly touching her arm. Brenda gave a weak smile. "I'm nervous. It's been so long since I've seen him. And now like this, I know, but I think it's important for him, for you, for the, whole story." They went up to the 8th floor together. The hallway was busier than usual, doctors and nurses bustling about with clipboards and medications. When they entered room 804, Marina immediately saw that something was different. Edward was slightly propped up in bed, not lying completely flat as he always was, and his eyes were half open, as if he were trying to open them, but didn't have the strength yet. Marina rushed to the bed. "Dad?" There was no response, but she saw his eyelids flutter, as if he were fighting against an invisible weight. The attending physician entered. Right behind them, a middle-aged woman with her hair in a bun and a professional but kind look. "He's showing signs of waking," she explained. "It's nothing definitive yet, but this morning's neurological exams showed more intense brain activity. He might be trying to come back." Marina felt her eyes well up. "Because of the cat?" The doctor gave an enigmatic smile. I can't explain it medically, but some patients react to emotional stimuli in ways science doesn't fully understand yet. Whatever that animal represents to him, it seems to be acting as an anchor, a reason to return. That's when they heard the meow. Patches entered the room with his characteristic walk, completely ignoring the three women, and jumped straight onto the bed. He settled beside Edward as he always did, but this time something different happened. Edward's hand moved slowly, heavily, until it touched the cat's head. It was a weak, almost imperceptible movement, but it was intentional. He was petting Patches. Brenda let out an emotional gasp. It's him. It's really him. Marina looked at her and saw tears streaming down the woman's face. She took her hand and squeezed it, sharing a moment that felt both, small and immense, fragile and powerful. They stayed there for hours, talking in low voices, telling stories about Edward that the doctor listened to with respectful attention. Brenda spoke about the visits to the school, about how the children loved it when he showed up with Patches, about his infinite patience for listening to their stories. She talked about the nursing home, how the seniors looked forward to his visits, how he played the guitar and sang old songs that made everyone cry with nostalgia. And as she spoke, Marina watched her father. She watched every small reaction, every flutter of his eyelids, every subtle movement of his fingers. He was fighting. He was trying to come back. And for the first time, Marina wanted him to come back. Not out of obligation, not out of protocol, but because she wanted to truly know him. She wanted to talk, to ask why he did things the way he did, to understand. She wanted perhaps to give him the chance to be a father, and to give herself the chance to be a daughter. When they left the hospital, the sun was setting. Brenda took Marina's hands and squeezed them tightly. "Thank you for letting me be a part of this. Thank you for not forgetting him." "I'm the one who should thank you," Marina replied. "You helped me find my father when I didn't even know I was looking." They said goodbye with a long hug, the kind that only happens when two people share something too deep for words. And as Marina drove home, she felt a strange peace. It wasn't happiness, not complete relief, but it was hope. And sometimes, hope was all you needed to keep fighting. The storm hit without warning, as it often does in New York at the end of March. The sky darkened in minutes, heavy grey clouds completely blocking the afternoon sun. Marina was at home, reviewing the documents from Robert one more time, making notes, preparing her arguments, when the first claps of thunder echoed through the city. She looked out the window and saw the rain begin to fall, thick and violent, turning the streets into makeshift rivers in seconds. She thought of Patches, the little cat who made the journey to the hospital every day. She wondered if he would seek shelter somewhere, or if he would insist on his visit, even in this storm. The phone rang. It was the hospital. Marina answered, her heart already racing, because calls from the hospital were never good news. "Ms. Hayes, it's Sharon from the 8th floor. We have a problem." "What happened?" "There was a power outage because of the storm. The emergency generators kicked in, but for a few minutes, everything went dark. And when the lights came back on, the cat was gone. No one knows how he got out, but he's not here anymore. And your father, his vital signs are dropping. It's not critical yet, but it's concerning." Marina hung up and ran to grab her car keys. She didn't think twice, didn't hesitate. She had to find Patches. Somehow that animal was the connection that kept Edward fighting, that pulled him back to life. And if he disappeared, if that connection broke, Marina didn't want to think about what might happen. The rain was so heavy that visibility was near zero. Marina drove slowly, the windshield wipers working frantically, but almost useless against the downpour. She drove past the hospital, searching the surrounding area, but there was no sign of the cat. She thought about giving up, about going home and hoping he would show up on his own as he always did. But then she remembered Brenda, remembered the stories, the places Edward used to visit. She grabbed her phone and called her. "Brenda, I need your help. Patches is missing, and I have to find him. Can you help me look in the places where you used to see my father with him?" Brenda didn't hesitate. "I'll meet you at the school in Astoria in 20 minutes. Marina crossed the city in the torrential rain, each minute feeling like an eternity. When she Finally reached the public school Brenda had mentioned, she found the woman already waiting at the door, under a red umbrella that barely protected her. They began to search. First around the school, then at the nursing home 2 blocks away, then in every alley, every side street, every corner where a scared cat might have hidden. The rain was relentless, and they were completely soaked, but they kept going, because they both knew this was about more than just finding a lost animal. It was about saving Edward. It was about completing a story that had begun years ago, when a powerful developer decided to crouch on a dirty sidewalk to feed a stray cat. It was Brenda who found him. In an abandoned lot, 3 blocks from the nursing home, hidden under a broken concrete slab. Patches was huddled, shivering, his left hind leg at an odd angle, clearly injured. He meowed weakly when he saw Brenda approaching but didn't try to run. He was too tired, too hurt, too scared. Marina carefully picked up the cat, wrapping him in her jacket. He nestled against her, his warm, wet body trembling against her chest. "Let's get him to a vet," Marina said, already running back to the car. The nearest veterinary clinic was still open, thanks to an emergency they had handled earlier. The vet, a young man with round glasses, examined Patches carefully and frowned. "His leg is broken. He'll need surgery. It's a simple procedure, but it will take a few hours." "Do whatever it takes," Marina said. "Please." While they waited, Marina and Brenda sat side by side in the clinic's hallway, still soaked, still shivering from cold and adrenaline. Brenda took Marina's hand and squeezed it. "He's going to be okay. They're both going to be okay." Marina wanted to believe it. She needed to believe it. Because if losing Patches meant losing her father too, then she wasn't just fighting for a cat's life. She was fighting for the chance to finally have a family, even if that family was imperfect, delayed, built on years of absences and misunderstandings. The surgery took 2 hours. When the vet finally came out of the room, he was smiling. "Everything went well. The fracture is set, and he'll need to wear a splint for a few weeks, but he'll make a full recovery." Marina felt her legs go weak with relief. "Can we take him now?" "He's still under anesthesia, but yes, you can take him. I just need you to come back in a week for a follow-up." Marina took the still drowsy Patches in her arms and rushed to the car. The storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean and smelling of wet earth. The traffic was chaotic, streets flooded, traffic lights out, but Marina didn't care. She drove carefully but with determination, her eyes fixed on the road, the cat sleeping peacefully in her lap. When she arrived at the hospital, it was almost midnight. She went up to the 8th floor holding Patches as if he were the most precious thing in the world. Sharon was at the nurse's station and ran over as soon as she saw her. "You found him?" Marina just nodded, too tired to speak. They entered room 804 together. The monitors showed that Edward's vital signs had stabilized, but he looked more fragile than ever, his face pale, his breathing shallow. Marina approached the bed slowly and placed Patches, still asleep from the anesthesia, beside her father. The cat instinctively snuggled against Edward's body, even unconscious, as if he knew exactly where he was supposed to be. And then it happened. Edward's eyes opened. Not completely, not all at once, but they opened. And for the first time in 3 months, he looked. He looked at the cat. He looked at Marina. And a tear slid down his face, followed by another and another, until he was crying silently, his lips trembling as if he were trying to say something but couldn't find the words. Marina took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Dad, I'm here. Patches is here. We're both here." Edward's voice was weak, hoarse, almost inaudible. "Marina?" "Yes, it's me." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if the effort of staying conscious was too much. But when he opened them again, there was something different in them. There was recognition. There was emotion. There was life. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything." Marina felt her own tears fall. "Not now, Dad. Right now, you just need to rest and get well." But Edward squeezed her hand with a surprising strength for someone who had spent months in a coma. "I have to say it, I need you to know." Marina leaned closer, her face near his. "I know, Dad." I found out everything. Brenda told me, the kids, the nursing home, Patches. I know about all of it. Edward closed his eyes again, and more tears fell. I didn't know how to be a father. I didn't know how to love without messing everything up. So I loved from a distance. I loved where no one could see me fail. You didn't fail, Marina whispered. You just loved in your own way. And I'm trying to understand that. I'm trying to really get to know you. They stayed like that for long. Minutes, hands intertwined, Patches sleeping between them, the hospital silent around them. It was a fragile, imperfect, but profoundly real moment. And for the first time, Marina felt like she had a father. Not the father she had dreamed of as a child, not the fairy tale father, but the real one. Flawed, complicated, but present. In the following days, Edward's recovery was slow but steady. He began to speak more, to move more easily, to show clear signs that he was coming back. The doctors were amazed, calling it an exceptional recovery, a rare case, something that defied the statistics. But Marina knew it wasn't luck. It was Patches. It was love. It was a second chance the universe had decided to give to a story that could have ended in tragedy. Robert tried to visit a few times, but Edward refused to see him. Through Marina, he sent a clear message. He wanted a full audit of all company accounts, complete transparency about the transactions made while he was unconscious, and for Robert to step down temporarily from the CEO position until everything was cleared up. It was Gerald Martin, ironically, who brought the news. An internal investigation revealed that Robert had been embezzling funds into personal accounts, approving fraudulent contracts, and trying to sell part of the company to an international group without proper authorization. He claimed he was protecting Edward's legacy, but in reality, he was only protecting his own interests. Edward could have sued him, could have destroyed him publicly, could have made an example of him. But he didn't. Instead, he called Robert for a conversation at the hospital, with Marina present. It was a difficult, painful conversation, full of hard truths and heavy silences. But in the end, Edward offered something no one expected: forgiveness. Not forgetting, not total absolution, but a chance to start over. Robert was removed from the company but was given support to start a new venture, far from the shadow of Hayes Construction, on the condition that he seek help and prove he could change. Because Edward had learned something during those months of darkness. He had learned that holding a grudge was easy, but forgiving was transformative. That judging was simple, but offering second chances was brave. And that in the end, family was this: imperfect people trying to do the best they could, getting it wrong a lot, getting it right a little, but continuing to try. 2 months later, Edward was discharged from the hospital. Marina converted one of the rooms in her apartment into a space for him, as the doctors recommended he not be alone for the first few weeks. And so father and daughter began to build something they had never had, a real life together. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, arguments about the past, frustrations with their differences. But there were also shared breakfasts, movies watched together, long conversations about everything and nothing. And slowly, Marina began to know the man behind the corporate mask. She discovered he liked jazz, that he cried watching old movies, that he had a dry sense of humor she had never seen before. She discovered he was a bad cook but insisted on trying, that he read poetry in secret, that he was afraid of thunderstorms but would never admit it. And Edward discovered the daughter he had lost while he was too busy building an empire. He discovered she was talented, strong, independent. He discovered she had inherited not just his eyes but also his stubbornness, his determination, and yes, his difficulty in expressing affection. He discovered that she too loved in a twisted, hidden but profound way. Patches naturally moved in with them. He recovered completely from the fracture and went back to being the same independent and affectionate cat he had always been. Edward treated him like a son, and Marina joked that she finally had a little brother. As for the company, Marina took over as CEO with a new vision. She transformed Edward's secret donations into an official corporate social responsibility program, creating partnerships with schools, nursing homes, and community centers. She hired Brenda to coordinate the social projects, offering her not just a job, but a key role in the new direction of Hayes Construction. And together, they created something Edward had never managed to create alone: transparency. The company's acts of kindness were now public, not as marketing, but as accountability, as a way of showing that profit and compassion were not opposites, but could walk side by side. A year after Edward's discharge, the company opened the first Patches Community Support Center, a space dedicated to animal-assisted therapy for people recovering from trauma, illness, or difficult situations. It was Marina's idea, but Edward cried when he heard about it. He cried with pride, with gratitude, with everything he couldn't express in words. On opening day, Edward gave a speech. It was short because he still wasn't good with words, but it was sincere. He spoke about second chances, about how a little cat had saved not just his life, but his soul. He spoke about how he had spent decades building buildings, but was only now learning to build bridges. Bridges between himself and other people, between himself and his daughter, between himself and the man he had always been afraid to be. And when he finished, Marina went up on stage and hugged him. It was a long, tight hug, the kind of hug that makes up for years of absence, the kind of hug that says everything words never could. The following years brought more changes. Edward officially retired, but remained involved in social projects no longer in secret, but as an open mission. Marina turned Hayes Construction into a benchmark for sustainability and social responsibility, proving that it was possible to be successful without being cruel, powerful without being indifferent. And Patches? Patches lived for many years by their side, a silent witness to a transformation he himself had initiated. When old age finally came for the little cat, it was gentle. He fell asleep one Sunday afternoon, lying in the sun in Marina's apartment, with Edward stroking his head and whispering words of gratitude. They buried him in the garden of the community support center that bore his name. They planted a tree in his memory, a crabapple tree, because Edward said Patches liked to lie in its shade. It wasn't a grand funeral. There were no elaborate speeches or formal ceremonies. It was just a moment of silence, of respect, of acknowledgement for everything that little being had done. A few months later, during a visit to the center, Marina and Edward saw a stray cat wandering through the garden. It was young, thin, with orange fur and intense green eyes. It approached slowly, cautiously, and stopped in front of Edward. They looked at each other for a few seconds, man and animal, as if having a silent conversation. Edward crouched down, held out his hand, and the cat came closer. It rubbed its head against his fingers, purring loudly. Marina saw the smile on her father's face, that serene smile of someone who had finally found peace. "I think he needs a home," Edward said. Marina smiled. "I think you're right." And so the story continued. Because that's what life was. Cycles that closed and opened, people who left and arrived, wounds that healed and new chances that emerged. And in the midst of it all, there was always room for love, even when it came in the most unexpected forms, from the most unlikely places, through the most improbable creatures. Edward Hayes had learned that the hard way, but he had learned, and now with his daughter by his side, with a new cat purring in his arms, with a life rebuilt on the ruins of what could have been, he finally knew what it meant to be home. It wasn't a place. It wasn't a building constructed by his company. It wasn't the luxurious office or the empty mansion. Home was where you could be vulnerable, where you could make mistakes and be forgiven, where love was expressed not in grand gestures, but in small daily presences, in shared breakfasts, in unhurried conversations, in comfortable silences. Home was right here, in this moment, with Marina by his side, with a cat in his arms, with the setting sun painting the sky orange and pink. Home was finally the place where he belonged. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Marina and Edward touched your heart. If you were moved by the journey of reconciliation between a father and daughter, by the transformative presence of little Patches, and by the discovery that it's never too late to start over, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what resonated with you the most. Every day we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul. Speaking of second chances, of love hidden behind walls, and of how the most unlikely beings can be the messengers of the greatest transformations. We'll see you in the next episode, where a new story of emotion and overcoming is ready to touch your life.